important part of this whole process. Work in general, not just sales, but communication overall. The importance of being able to present and communicate.
The power of persuasion, yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
The moment a person gets given the opportunity to get onto a stage or even at a networking event, speak, or even in a boardroom scenario, is offered the opportunity to present, everyone sees that person as the expert. So if you as a CEO or manager are shy of presenting, you are losing out on core opportunities, on upping your level of persuasion with core stakeholders in your business. So if you have the ability to present and speak well, you can actually persuade your staff to work better, you can persuade your shareholders, your shares can increase, you can, in a PR crisis situation, actually be able to deal with the media better. And I've seen quite a few lecturers on university levels say they are struggling to connect with the students in the class. So at University of Pretoria, they have 300 to 500 to 1,000 students in the class sometimes. And the lecturers are competing against the cell phones, the laptops, the tablets with all of the millennials. And they're saying if they don't get to learn how to tell stories and connect with a bigger audience and actually divert the students' attention away from their cell phones and whatever they're doing in their own minds, they're not actually going to have the impact to help them take that information and knowledge and, be on the journey with the lecturer. So there are various ways that it can actually help a person connect with the audience, but also whether it's over the phone or just in a one-on-one meeting, if you can speak better, you will do better in business.
Well, I think it goes back to even the skills we learn at school. So it's one of those things, yes, you get to do speeches, but you're not really taught communication skills at all. In fact, nowadays, millennials battle to actually speak and know how to speak on a phone, how to answer a phone, it's just one of those things because everything is texted. We just simply SMS or we email and those skills are gone. In any company, it's not just about the sales, but it's how you communicate with your colleagues. If you want to move further up the ladder, you have to be able to speak because regardless of the level, there comes a time when you're going to have to present to the board, you're going to have to present at meetings, and a lot of people just fall apart completely.
Sometimes you get people that are really shy, but then you get people that like speaking a lot and they tend to overwhelm and people switch off. So if you can bring your point across in a concise way, in a way that people can actually listen to it and remember it, you will have much greater success as well.
Okay, so you do this for a living.
Yes.
You speak a lot as well. Tell us about how you got into speaking. Were you always a natural speaker, or did you have to be trained, or something that you had to practice?
Many years ago, I was working at a company, Pearson Education, a publishing house, and we had to do these presentations to 300, 400, 500 lecturers at the FET colleges, and at that stage, there was huge issues with the textbooks. The new OBE curriculum was launched, and textbooks were being published and being submitted to the Department of Education. But a lot of crisis management was happening because the lecturers were waiting for their books. So we had to do these presentations for reputation management. We would get onto a stage with a microphone and all the lecturers would be shouting. So what I learned there was the value of presenting and actually addressing the problems before people have asked a question or called you out on it. Speak about the elephant in the room.
Right.
Talk about the solutions. So what Pearson did really well was sending us on a presentation skills course more than 10 years ago. And there was an incredible speaker there, Deshaun Casel. She's climbed Everest, I think, like 7 times, and next year her and a few women are climbing it again. And I went to her during the course and said, how do you do this thing of getting into speaking? I was like, I've never had a calling, but I believe this is my calling. And she said, well, join Toastmasters. So 10 years ago, that's what I did. And throughout the years, I actually completed my Distinguished Toastmasters July last year. I went through all of the processes, did all of the leadership tracks. And what I noticed as I was learning and practicing is people started referring to me as a speaker. So all of my friends that got married through the years would say, can you do a toast at our wedding? Next thing that happened, I was the master of ceremonies. The next thing that happened, people were asking me to do corporate talks or inviting me to speak at events. So the moment you get comfortable, people start asking you because they feel comfortable. They don't feel comfortable about it, and they see that you're good at it. So I saw my reputation rise quite a bit and progress in business on a leadership level, all of that. So speaking is definitely something that you can learn and grow into. But one of my international mentors, Daryl LaCroix, he actually won the World Champs many years ago in Toastmasters, and he said, you need stage time, stage time, stage time.
I think that's the only way you're going to overcome the fear. And let's be honest, people that... There's some very good... I've met a lot of people that can have a fantastic conversation. They're very well spoken, but don't get them on a stage. There's this fear, and they're never going to overcome that fear unless they start to practice.
Yeah, so what I did when I studied NLP and I actually developed this course on the power of persuasion is I actually brought various NLP and coaching techniques in to deal with that fear. So like various visualization ideas, a bit of circle of excellence. There's various ways that you can trick your brain to give you a confident state. So sometimes I've had even CEOs that ask me to coach them on confidence, and they're getting on stage and they're getting the butterflies in their stomach, or they're having nightmares, and I had to actually help them with the NLP process, train that or change that pattern in their brain. So in the course, I give you some of the techniques, but if you need the deep work, individual coaching session is better,
Obviously, preparation is everything as well.
Definitely. And have you watched the Lady Gaga performance of Bradley Cooper at the Oscars?
I haven't. My wife has.
I
saw snippets, but I haven't.
So an example of preparation comes in there. I saw a YouTube video of hers after she'd won the Oscar for the most original song, and she spoke about their preparation and rehearsals before the Oscars. And I found it to be so interesting. So you speak about design thinking. It was a beautiful design, the way that Bradley Cooper envisioned it. So he decided everything in terms of, so if you watch the video, look out for certain things in terms of what's happening with the lights. So Lady Gaga actually phoned the person in charge of the lighting at the Oscars to do certain things with the lighting and the audience, how they're bringing up the piano, how he actually leads her up on stage, where they're standing. So he stands across from her at the beginning, then she goes and sits down at the piano, starts playing, then he moves around and kind of like snuggles up next to her. It's all beautifully designed. It's a performance, and they rehearsed it thoroughly. So how well do people actually rehearse and have a performance when they go and address an audience? And very few of them actually put in that effort, as Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga, real professionals, did.
Sure, and I think that's very important, is that you got to see it as a performance. So you need to know your subject matter backwards. The days of having keynotes and pieces of paper, as far as I'm concerned, are dead and buried. I go to a lot of conferences. You don't want to see somebody with notes. You've got a monitor up, you've got a screen, your subject matter is there, you need to know it backwards. There's nothing wrong with being prompted with certain things that happen on the screen, but surely that is step number one.
Definitely, there are ways. So if you, for instance, make use of PowerPoint, there are ways to actually put a few bullet points on the back end, that if there's a way for you to actually see the screen which is positioned away from the audience,
yes,
that you could at least see which is the next slide with a few prompts. But you need to know exactly what to say from there. So actually just having a lot of text on there that you're reading is not on. So it's like having a main image and maybe 2 or 3 main points and having a conversation around that. And that's really the style that everyone's going for at the moment. More images, much less text, and telling stories.
And we'll actually get onto that just now. We'll get onto the telling stories as well as the visual aspect of what a presentation looks like. But I'd like to take it back a step, because many people and good employees are killed in a boardroom because there's a monthly meeting and they've got to go present, for instance, their numbers or a new initiative or a new strategy, and they go in there and they rattle it all off. There's no emotion, there's no, I'm passionate about this, this is why I want it. And suddenly there's one question and they fall apart. So scenario planning, I think even at boardroom level,
definitely
is vital. What happens if so-and-so asks me this?
So one of the things that I actually encourage people to do in the presentation bootcamp is preparing the questions that they can ask for you and asking yourself, what is the worst question that the audience can ask me? And preparing for that. So that's really your scenario planning.
Even if you've got bad numbers. So we know these numbers are bad. They're going to slaughter me basically because of this. How do I excuse it without coming up with excuses?
And is there a way to address that elephant in your presentation itself? So rather taking control yourself than waiting for them to ask the question. So if you've actually framed it in a way and already come up with solutions or explanations, it might be a completely different scenario than waiting for them to slaughter you as you're expecting.
And I think the importance is, so if you're in a company and you're aiming at getting to the top and climbing that ladder, that you start this regardless of your level. So juniors in companies should be honing in on these presentation skills, because it's going to fast track their progression surely.
All levels of staff need to see themselves as leaders, whether they have that title or not, because the moment you start having a voice, your followers will come and you can actually start making a huge difference in an organization on an influential level, even if you're not in management. And as you're progressing in your career, if people have noticed your leadership skills and your speaking skills, you'll be able to progress much quicker.
I mean, you don't see CEOs or MDs that are not able to address a company, an audience, or a press conference. If you don't have those skills, it's going to be very difficult to get to that kind of level.
Some of them have come to me for help.
Well, there you go. But as an employee, the advice is start early. Get your speaking skills, get your communication skills up to scratch. If you're an employer, it's vital that you start looking at this through every single rank of your business.
Definitely. And just in terms of what does your voice sound like when you're interacting with your clients over the phone, and what kind of communication is going out towards your clients? These days, people are doing so many YouTube videos. There are such nice ways to now interact with your clients. It doesn't just have to be a newsletter anymore.
No, correct. And I think if you're just looking and discussing like we were sales just now, there's very few salespeople that have been on communication or presentation skill courses or training.
And it can escalate your sales process so much quicker. So what can happen is the moment you're actually at a trade fair or wherever and you are bringing a topic of discussion, so something that's topical in your industry, people will come to you afterwards and speak to you and ask you for advice or input, versus you trying to headhunt everyone else there at the trade show. So can you do it the other way around, where people are actually coming to you?
You position yourself as an authority. Now let's get on to the actual physical aspect, because there's very few presentations without visuals. You know, they always say death by PowerPoint. PowerPoint or video or animation is never going to go away, because your audience you still got to, they want to see a visual of what you're discussing 90% of the time. There's nothing worse than going to a conference or a presentation and they whip up these amazing charts of just writing and bullet points, and the speaker is literally speaking to every single one of those points.
People just switch off. There are obviously a few others. So Prezi is a nice one as well that I've seen. A lot of speakers use Keynote as well. And the other day I saw someone doing something interesting. It was a trainer and he just used, but it was a smaller audience, a flip chart.
Okay.
So sometimes actually using props like what Steve Jobs did. He's one of my best examples with the MacBook Air. I don't know if you saw that product launch where he was presenting and there were the slides up, and then finally you walked over to a table and there was a brown envelope and out he pulled the MacBook Air, and it was just a sense of awe and unveiling. So the fact that it was so tiny and tactile brought a nice element to it.
Now tell me about this person presenting on a flip chart. Was he writing on it, or was the information already on it?
It was pre-prepared.
Okay.
He just had a few key things on there, so maybe a framework, and then he discussed that. And I thought that would actually work really well on a YouTube video as well, where you're doing a mini educational to clients. So instead of doing what everyone else is doing, could you do it in a fresh and different way? So maybe if you've designed a funky poster or whatever, you could even put that on the flip chart as well. So I know one of my favorite TED Talks is Simon Sinek's Starting With Why, which was on TED, and he was using a flip chart. And that's how we actually drew the golden circle, and everyone still remembers used that video. And someone else that's great at presenting as well, does a lot of YouTube, is Brendan Burchard, the Millionaire Messenger. He uses a lot of flip chart as well. So it's like an informal way of when you're on video.
Yeah, I think it's something unique because you're putting on a show. We're going to take a quick ad break, and then we're going to talk about telling the story.
DSTV channel 869 and streaming everywhere on the TuneIn Radio app. This is 1485 Radio Today.
Thank you for tuning in to the Design Authority. And we are talking presentation skills with Yoke Van Dam, who is the CEO of a company called Y Connect. And this is a follow-on if you've just joined us from last week, where we were discussing sales and the importance of strategy. And obviously coupled with that is you've got to have great presentation skills. And we were just saying just now that regardless of your role in a company, whether you work for yourself, it doesn't matter what you do. You've got to be able to communicate, and you've got to be able to communicate well. Tell us about storytelling. It's this buzzword that's everywhere. So brands have to tell stories. You've got to tell stories on social media. Your marketing's got to tell stories. But now you're a speaker, or you're presenting at a conference, or you're presenting at a sales meeting. How do I tell stories?
So storytelling is really an age-old phenomenon, and that was the way in which history was translated for years, where people were actually sitting around those campfires, and you would have the old chief leader or grandfather conveying that story. So when you actually start telling a story, it taps a person's unconscious mind, and it makes their inner child happy, and they actually sit a bit forward. So even if you just use the word imagine, or a long time ago, or you delve into a story immediately, you've got the audience's attention. So what I've found with storytelling is I started using stories in my training, because as I was training, remember last week we spoke about training salespeople at Auto Trader, and sometimes getting frustrated because I would train them and they would forget what I trained them on, even though they've written tests and everything. So eventually I read a book, Brain Power by John Medina, who spoke specifically about storytelling. And he said if you evoke emotions in your audience, your brain releases dopamine, and it actually enhances memory. So if you're telling a story, you can allow the audience to actually remember what you've said.
Okay.
So that's really where I started changing my sales approaches adding more personal stories coupled with the theory that I was teaching and the products. And even 2-3 years later, people come up to me and say, I still remember that story and the lesson from that, or they would relate to the metaphor. And we would laugh about it, but it shows that it's stuck in their mind.
Well, that's so interesting, because I'm going to jump back to sales now. Now, for a salesperson to understand what's happening in the industry, to continually research, to find something that's applicable to the product they're selling or the service they're selling that's just an innovation or whatever it is, that can become a story without a hard sell.
Definitely. So I was referring to case studies earlier on.
Yes.
You're telling a story. You're telling them about the winter, the White Walker, what you did, and what was the solution. It actually becomes a story, and it's much more of a softer sell. But what happens is, I say you make the horse thirsty. So you're not talking product, you're talking about similar clients that you've helped that were in dire straits, and this is what happened to them, and then you came in, and then suddenly they're like, but we're sitting with the same issue, or couldn't you help us with something like that too? So you're putting the power back where the client wants it.
Okay. I'm standing on stage, I'm presenting this thing now. Also, there's nothing worse than hearing a story that you've heard at another conference, or a tagline, or a joke, or something that is just generic. You've got to research what you're putting out there and don't plagiarize, surely.
So the golden rule is, can you bring in more personal stories? Because if it's your personal story, you own it. You are the main character, or one of my favorite presentation coaches, Patricia Fripp, says, don't make yourself the hero of your own story.
Yeah,
You
because
could
people
be-
don't really want to hear about you
No.
unless you're a motivational speaker that's climbed Kilimanjaro or something like that. Then they want to hear about you.
So can you talk about what your mentor taught you? Can you talk about the failings that you've had, where you were, and how you improved? So I love the interview style of Nadine Todd at Entrepreneur Magazine, and I was at this We Are SME event a while ago, and she interviewed one of the CEOs of the Burgers Rocamamas.
Yes.
And in all of her feature articles, the focus was not just on, oh, you're so great. It was, what failures have you had in your life? It was actually delving into the things that got them to where they are now. It wasn't looking at how is their home looking like, what cars are they driving. It wasn't a lifestyle focus like you would have on Top Billing. It was so that the readers could actually relate to the hardships they had, the grit they had to have, the determination, the lessons they had to learn to be able to become successful. And that's what people can relate to. Your failings, the hard things. If you're willing to, like Brene Brown says, if you're willing to be vulnerable and lower your walls, that's where people buy into you.
That's where the connection is. That's the authenticity.
Definitely.
I'm listening to a real person. I'm not listening to this robot. Visuals to accompany that, because obviously if you've got great visuals as well when you prepare your presentations, it can also be remembered.
So can you make sure that that the images you're using doesn't have copyright? So are you just grabbing them from Google Images, and does it have like stock photo written all over that?
I've seen that a million times.
It's terrible. So a lot of people have never been taught this, and that's something we also train on in this course, is what are some of the free sites where you can get free images that will be in high quality? Or should you actually, as a business, be investing in some stock photos that will be original so that your presentation doesn't look like all of the other companies that are using the free stock photos?
Or alternatively, invest in those presentations and get an outside company that specializes in that to put the production together for you.
Definitely.
Because that is going to make or break you, especially if you're a big company presenting. There's you can't do great stuff in-house because you don't have that sort of capability.
And it's going to, in the long run, save you a lot on your reputation. You're going to have a much greater impact by making that investment, and you're going to have much greater results. So you're seeing a lot of keynote speakers that even have mini show reels, videos at the start that's pulling people into the presentation as well. Most companies cannot do that themselves, or it will be very low quality. So that's where you actually bring the experts like yourself on board to do that.
Another thing is getting to ease and feeling confident, and that goes with part of the preparation, is you arrive at the venue. Now, I've seen speakers rush in, scramble, and their audio doesn't work, this doesn't work. What advice do you have, number one, for the amount of backups that you take with you, and checking equipment before you even get started?
I'll give you some ideas. Last year I was as a speaker at the Disrupt HR, which was a massive audience, 300 to 500 at the Barnyard Rivonia, on a huge stage, you know, being mic'd up, all of that. And the format there is your slides go on rotate every, I think, 15 seconds, a new slide comes on. So you need to be so super prepared. You don't have any access to clicking or anything like that. And you had to actually provide the slides beforehand. One of the things that happened there is, can you find out if you're part of a slide deck? So let's say there's a few presenters. What is the size of the screen? Would they prefer you to have the narrow standard size or the bigger size slide design? So I've done sometimes trainings with different training providers where I did my slides and I didn't check beforehand on what format theirs would be. And
yeah, it doesn't fill the screen.
I had to redesign my entire deck. It took me hours to make them fit together. So that's just one of the factors, which is more on a design level long before you get there. So can you make sure that, for instance, what kind of cables will they have?
Yeah, especially if you've got a Mac. If you've got a Mac, you're going to need those adapters. The sound guys will not have them, I can guarantee you.
Can you have a backup on maybe a memory stick? Can you even save your presentation in the cloud on a Google Drive or somewhere that you could access should something bad happen?
I think the safest is, and I mean, I work on a Mac, so everything I do is in Keynote.
Brilliant.
Is always save it out as a PowerPoint presentation as well, because if something goes wrong, 90% of these conferences will have PowerPoint, they won't have Keynote. If you're working on Keynote, make sure that you've arranged beforehand that you have your laptop in front of you.
Definitely. Another speaker recommends, should you be using your own computer, that you already have opened your presentation in the correct way, so that if you're giving your laptop, because he prefers doing that, if you're giving that to the person that's connecting it, that they don't connect it and now they're seeing your photo where you were on the beach with someone and all of your folders on your desktop. So make it so professional that it's literally open, it's already opened up in the correct place, that it can just start playing. So something else that people could look at getting is a clicker. So there are various devices available.
Some very expensive ones, which are great.
But looking at, is the stage going to be so big that I need a larger range?
Yes.
So some clickers won't even carry over that long distance. So you really need to look at all of that. Things that I've had to do for presentations is go there beforehand and check the venue setup. If you're happy with, if they are actually packing out the chairs, could you send them a design in the way that you want it? Or could you otherwise go early and change it if you're unhappy with it? Because you as the speaker or presenter, you want to have a certain feel or vibe for the venue. And that energy, the way that it's designed, will have a huge impact on how you'll feel towards the audience and your connection with them.
Absolutely. And also make sure that you have some or other device with you that is reminding you, or that you can see how much time you have left and how many slides you've got to go, because there's nothing worse than a speaker that just rambles on way past and makes everybody else late. You look completely unprofessional.
Last thing that I want to add is have a backup, so that should the electricity completely be cut out, as we know that happens,
A lot.
that you either make a mind map or something so that should you have an hour keynote, you just have your main opening, close, and core points that you could maybe put on a table or something that you can just casually walk over and glance, and that won't hinder the audience at all. But that's just your backup so that you are not reliant on the slides, which might not even be there.
Yeah, you might just have to go for it. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Very, very insightful. And the importance of this is just paramount, regardless if you're an employee or an employer. We've run out of time. Thank you for listening. Yoke, how do we get hold of you? How do our listeners out there get hold of you?
They can call me at 060-928-5961, or they can go to my website at y-connect.biz. y-connect.biz.
Thank you so much for coming in. I hope you, the listener, enjoyed that as much as I did. I hope you'll join me next week again, same time between 6 and 7 for the Design Authority right here on Radio Today. Thank you for listening. Design is everything. Do you want to find out why design is everything? Well, tune in every Wednesday evening at 6 and listen to the Design Authority. We will discuss products, business, education, retail, and many more aspects of design. That's the Design Authority with me, Dave Nemeth, every Wednesday at 6 p.m. right here on Radio Today, 1485 AM and DSTV channel 869.
The Design Authority every Wednesday at 6 p.m.
Design is everything. Design is everything. Design is everything.